Welcome to Between the Gutters, where we talk about the stories within the panels. I'm your co-host Albert. Welcome to Between the Gutters, where we talk about the stories within the panels. I'm your co-host Albert, and with us is our other co-host.
I'm Drew. What's happening, everybody?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Between the Gutters, and today we mentioned last week that we would be going over the Manga Space Brothers. Well, I guess I'll give a little bit in information about it first before we do our deep dive. It's a manga by Chuya Koyama, published by Kodansha, and it originally began serialization in Japan in December 2007. In brief, it's the story of two brothers in space, obviously, but the brief description of it is it begins with two brothers as kids, and some sort of space-related phenomena occurs that leaves an impact on both of them, both of their memories and their reflections as they grow into adulthood. And the story, their psyches, exactly. And the story fast forwards after this phenomena with one of them, the younger brother, growing up to be an astronaut, while the older brother ends up being he works as a car designer initially, but when we begin the story, he's in the middle of being fired from that job, and he's searching for a direction in his life when he gets word that he has the opportunity to become an astronaut like his little brother. So he takes it upon himself to embark on this journey to becoming an astronaut. That is essentially what it's about. Do you remember the brothers' names, Drew?
Hibito, and the older brother is Muta.
Nice. Did you feel that I missed anything that needed to be mentioned, or that you feel you wanted to mention to our listeners?
Well, I would just merely clarify that it's actually a really long series.
Yeah.
This series, like you said, it started in late 2007, and it's still going on in Japan right now.
Yeah.
So they're still making new installments. And I think in terms of the number of volumes available, it's like 39, or just somewhere in terms of the number of volumes available, it's like 39, or just somewhere in the upper 30s, maybe even the 40s by now.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised by that fact when you mentioned it to me, because I was under the impression that this manga being as old as it was done already, but apparently not.
Yeah, back in 2012 to 2014, there was an anime television series based on the manga, and the anime series went for 99 episodes. I've never watched the anime, so I don't know how closely it follows the manga.
Yeah.
But I assume that because the anime ended at 99 episodes while the manga's still going on, I assume that towards the end, the anime probably came up with its own ending, or maybe it just stopped at wherever.
Do end up getting animes and live action adaptations. It's I'm not super versed in anime, but
you've watched your fair share, Albert.
I've watched my fair share.
You've definitely watched your share now.
I haven't made it my life to know anime, to make my life nothing but about anime, but I can handle myself in a conversation for sure. Yeah. But my point being, I'm constantly surprised to find and like I'm coming to the point where I really shouldn't be surprised, but I'm like I said, I'm constantly surprised to find that there are live action versions of mangas and animes that I'm surprised, but I'm like I said, I'm constantly surprised to find that there are live action versions of mangas and animes that I'm into, And in addition to that, there are even cases where I'm surprised of things that have already been rebooted, versions of mangas and animes that I'm into. And in addition to that, there are even cases where I'm surprised of things that have already been rebooted, you know? It feels like they tend to move a lot faster in Japan on these things, but I could be.
Alive with new
Yeah,
adaptations is what I
yeah.
meant.
And
Yeah.
that makes sense. Like, especially if, like, they hit on a gold mine where something becomes beloved, then they just act quickly to make sure that it remains front and center in the.
Has some kind of lasting power somehow. Like
Yeah,
I think of something like Ghost in the Shell, and the
yeah,
original manga was published, early 90s or maybe even late 80s,
yeah,
and we got so many Ghost in the Shell continuations in animation,
yeah,
that 90s by Mamoru Oshii,
yeah,
and then you had stuff like Standalone Complex, which was an unrelated anime series, and then
yeah.
you had Ghost in the Shell 2, or actually properly titled Innocence, a sequel
Mm,
movie. Properly titled Innocence, a sequel
mm,
movie. Then you had the stuff that was more recent, or I guess it's not even that recent anymore, but from like, I don't know, 5 or 7 years ago, the the Ghost in the Shell Arise series,
mm,
Ghost in the Shell Arise series.
mm.
And then, of course, you had Hollywood make a live action version, but we don't talk about that unless it's to denigrate it and mock it.
Exactly. Exactly. That's true. There's a bunch of stuff that we're them constantly surprised by. Like the other thing that I could think of, and this is a slightly different experience, but I'm not too familiar with it, but from my understanding, the manga Berserk, or not even the manga, the anime Berserk came
Hmm.
out, and then there was like this massive hiatus. Somewhat recently, they began putting episodes out again, and it kind of just picked up where it left off, which is,
Oh, it's a continuation.
I believe it is. Like maybe it's a loose continuation, but yeah, I mean like I said, I never watched the anime, but interesting way to do the show, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Some
Yeah.
stuff just doesn't die off too easily. Like they're able to put out more content
Yeah.
to
It's
interest
definitely
people.
not like my love life.
When you put it that way, we gotta do something to rejuvenate your love life the same way that Ghost in the Shell constantly gets rejuvenated, man.
The
We need to
shelf
figure out
life
what that is.
the shelf life for my romantic history should not be of Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man.
Well,
We're
that ends
barely
our
10 minutes
episode.
into this and I'm already feeling the heaviness.
um,
Anyway, Albert, why did we choose Space Brothers Volume 1?
so, as briefly as I can describe it, essentially, I was more aware of Space Brothers as an anime before I was aware of it as a manga, and even then, I didn't know anything about it as an anime. I was more aware of Space Brothers as an anime before I was aware of it as a manga, and even then, I didn't know anything about it as an anime. It was something that I saw constantly on sale at on even then I didn't know anything about it as an anime. It was something that I saw constantly on sale at on the various websites that we frequent when we're shopping for anime, and I think there was a simplicity to and I think there was a simplicity to the cover that appealed to me. It's
Mm-hmm.
usually just two brothers standing there in a blank white void, and
Mm-hmm.
and the title was Space Brothers. And I want to say that I had read the description of the anime. I remember offhand after I read it. It's like not something that stuck with me as much as that image did. So
Yeah.
we decided we wanted to do more anime uh, reviews for the podcast.
Manga
You
reviews.
manga reviews. Sorry about that. Seeing Space Brothers on your list, it was something that I felt would be a good opportunity to dip my toe in their world and to see if it was something where I could be intrigued beyond the visuals of their anime box, their anime box design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, Space Brothers, this was the first time I read it also, so it was new for me and pretty similar to you since we both and pretty similar to you since we both shop for sales, anime sales at the same time
Yeah.
when there's stuff going on at those websites we go to. We always see those Space Brothers anime on sale, but I don't think I've ever seen like the whole thing on sale. It's always like random volumes. It's always like random volumes of the anime.
Yeah, or
Or
large chunks of it.
yeah, or large chunks of it. And it's 99 episodes, so if you had to buy all of the volumes individually to get all 99, it still feels like it'd be a pretty big financial investment, and that's why I've never pounced on the deal, knowing that there's just this massive void that I have no access to. Again, similar to my romantic life. It's like going on a really nice first date and then never seeing her again, you know?
It doesn't have to be a happy fantasy world. I'm willing to read a manga where everybody's lives just get devastated. Anything, as long as I'm not thinking about my own life.
Yeah, that's true.
I think. Well, first of all, I'll say this much. Having read that first volume, I will say that I'm interested to read more of it. We did have a discussion prior to check that this was a manga series that is still ongoing today, and whether that would be problematic for us to start something that doesn't have an ending. And at the time, I was like, yeah, you know what, that's fine. Like I can read it and attitude where it wouldn't bother me that much.
Oh yeah, you have to have a lot of emotional fortitude.
Comics will break your heart.
Being us, yeah, living our lives.
For sure. Yeah,
absolutely.
For sure. But having read that, or having said that, I will say that I do wish. Yeah,
absolutely.
For sure. But having read that, or having said that, I will say that I do wish. Well, one, I am interested in continuing to read it, and two, I do wish that this was something that I do wish. Well, one, I am interested in continuing to read it, and two, I do wish that this was something that probably had a definitive ending. Granted, I don't know how many volumes currently exist. Probably had a definitive ending. Granted, I don't know how many volumes currently exist, but like you said, there are 99 episodes of an anime, so I imagine it's a butt ton of volumes.
Yeah, they're definitely at least in the upper 30s, if not the 40s by. Yeah. And there's like 40 of them, so yeah.
Yeah. But still, that doesn't mean that I don't wish that there was an ending to it, or yeah. Well, anyways.
Well, there very well could be an ending. We just haven't arrived there yet.
Yeah. I explained at the beginning of the podcast that there was like some sort of some sort of phenomena that occurred to them as kids, and I'm still not even entirely sure what it was. I mean, it looks like it was some sort of UFO or something like that, but suffice it to say, the series was going to be about that, or I thought that was, and it could still end up being about that, but as you get past that, and as you enter the part of the story where they're adults, it really feels like that phenomena that occurred was more of a phenomena that occurred was more of a it was more of a milestone moment in their lives that solidified their bond and solidified their love of space, you know? So it almost doesn't
Yeah.
matter that it was about space, you know? So it almost doesn't
Yeah.
matter that it was about a UFO or whatever. It was really more about being captivated by the idea of space, you know?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And I will say that once we get into the story of both the brothers as adults, I was pretty into that because it really wasn't about space as much as it was about the older brother. I forget his name. Uh,
Muta.
Muta. Though it was really a story about Muta living in the. Though it was really a story about Muta living in the shadow of his younger brother, who was a huge success, who's basically a national hero, and him just trying to make his way in the world. And he still lives with the vestiges of this idea that as the older brother, he should be the one that his younger brother looks up to. But
Mm-hmm.
as an adult, he realizes that his brother is this great big national hero, and he's, this disgraced, fired employee. Said something about his brother, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But so, yeah, for me, it wasn't necessarily the story of them being in space, or of the story of them being in space, but I was captivated to find his way in the world, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Yeah.
much of this first volume is about Muta's journey in trying to be an astronaut himself. Because the thing that we learn when they're kids is that after they saw that UFO or whatever you want to call it, they made a promise to each other that they would both do whatever it takes to one day go into space to see
Yeah.
the stars and be able to witness that kind of phenomenon firsthand or up close. They would both do whatever it takes to one day go into space to see
Yeah.
the stars and be able to witness that kind of phenomenon firsthand or up close. And Hibito has been able to do that
Yeah.
and been very, just kind of like that high achieving, that kind of phenomenon firsthand or up close. And Hibito has been able to do that
Yeah.
and been very, just kind of like that high achieving, successful kind
Yeah.
of guy.
He met his potential.
Yeah, exactly. And now Muta guy.
He met his potential.
Yeah, exactly. And now Muta's trying to do the same, but he's playing
Yeah.
catch up. So this
Yeah.
first volume is about him applying to, I don't know what you call it, just astronaut school, or he's
Space
trying to apply to
Academy.
Space Academy. He's trying to apply to the program. He's
Space
trying to apply
Academy.
Space Academy. He's trying to apply to the program, and he has to. It's an arduous thing because there's
Yeah.
Thousands of applicants. You got to pass a bunch of tests, not just written tests, but physical tests, psychological tests, a whole bunch of interviews. There's this entire process, and I don't really know anything about being an astronaut. I don't know how accurate or true to life this is, but at least I can say for the story, it's believable enough, man.
Yeah.
Like I can understand that this isn't super, doesn't make sense. I'd have to listen to his wisdom of how the real thing is, but just as someone who knows nothing about
Yeah.
astronauts, this made sense to me. It seemed
Yeah.
logical.
Well, yeah, so the way that they set it up is that it almost feels like not so far outside of the realm of believability that I can watch this and be like, that's not how it works, because it's not super ridiculous. It's not super outlandish, right? They don't
Yeah.
their process isn't based on, okay, I'm gonna roll this based on that. Those are our applicants. It's believable. And like you, if an actual astronaut came out and said that's not how it works, it actually takes years and years of schooling, blah blah blah, and like we wouldn't just take applicants off the street, and like we wouldn't just take applicants off the street to sign up for it, then I would have to defer to their expertise on the
Yeah.
subject, right? But
Yeah.
for the sake of
The
for the sake
drama.
of the story,
The
for the sake
drama.
of the story, for the drama, I'll accept it. You know, it's
Yeah.
again, it's not so outside of the realm of possibility that it's impossible that it takes me out of the story itself.
Yeah. And the other thing to possibly consider is that, especially the chapters that we read in volume 1, these were originally from late 2007, early 2008, and the story itself is supposed to take place in the year 2025 when they're
Yeah,
adults. That's when they're adults. So in a way, you could even, when Koyama created the comic, he had to kind of envision what the future would look like too, to some extent, even
yeah,
though it's not
yeah,
like far in the future, it's still grounded in, so far it's still pretty grounded in realism. Like they're not
yeah,
training to be astronauts so they can fight an interstellar war against, genuinely trying to be astronauts because they love the idea of going into space.
yeah, yeah. Um, the other thing that I was gonna mention that I appreciated about this story was, um, so you mentioned how like a lot of volume one revolves around the older brother training and trying to qualify to become an astronaut.
Hmm.
And the one thing that I appreciate, or like the one thing out of the many things that I appreciated about this first volume is that, um, in his inner monologue, you really get to hear a lot of his insecurities. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of these scenes where, like, one of the scenes that sticks out to me where he's talking to the other pilots and they find out that he's the brother of this famous astronaut that's already been into space, and they just proceed to denigrate his achievements, getting as far as he has, his
Yeah.
and doing well with
The
the
tests.
testing, and
Yeah.
he thinks he's, huh.
I was just gonna continue on what you were saying because everybody's thinking, oh, you just did well because you asked your brother what was gonna be on the test.
Exactly, exactly. And like you did well because your brother told, when he wins, he's not really winning, at least in his mind.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We as the reader know that his brother had nothing to do with it. Like all of the effort was his own effort. He didn't even. It wasn't until those other applicants mentioned that he even thought asking him about what they're gonna test on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought that was kind of funny.
It was. I thought it was good drama too. On
Yeah,
top of that, it's it's not overly dramatic, but it's the kind of drama that makes sense. It's like that inner turmoil, right?
a situation that maybe not too many of us really experience, but the way that it's written and presented makes it feel like there's a great deal of verisimilitude because you can just buy into the emotional journey of it.
Mm,
Like even if this isn't really how astronauts, at the very least I can say this is how a human being would think or feel in that
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that counts for a lot to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
What are some of
Uh.
the things that jumped out situation?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that counts for a lot to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
What are some of
Uh.
the things that jumped out or stood out to you that you particularly appreciated?
Um. So.
What are some of
Uh.
the things that jumped out or stood out to you that you particularly appreciated?
Um. So I mentioned this earlier. We touched on this a little bit earlier, where we talked about again, like how the older brother has these insecurities, and honestly, that was a lot of stuff that was probably a large brunt of the emotional crux of the story that resonated with me was
Hmm.
this basically.
Yeah.
And not to get too real, but there are times in my life where, and I assume that everybody has moments like this, but where you look at where you are in life and you might not be necessarily be where you want to be, or you look at other people. And reading this comic, I felt for him. I was moved by his plight. I saw in him what I see in myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anytime a story can evoke those kind of genuine sentiments from you as the reader, that's some good stuff, man. It's
Yeah.
when you end up comparing yourself with people around you who are just
Yeah.
more successful or younger, and somehow they are ahead of you in
Yeah.
terms of career or life or whatever it may be, whatever the case may be, a lack of contentment in your situation.
Yeah.
That I don't know if everybody feels like that, but it kind of feels like a lot of people probably do. I don't know if
Yeah.
I don't know if people would admit to it the way you and I might, because you know we're
We're
we're not
vulnerable.
space brothers, but we're lonely brothers.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I was gonna say that I'm gonna presume that everyone has these moments, and that it's just human. I mean, I was gonna say that I'm gonna presume that everyone has these moments, and that it's just human nature to not always be content with yourself. Um, but certainly from my own, and that it's just human nature to not always be content with yourself. Um, but certainly from my own perspective, it's something that definitely rings true with me.
Yeah.
Uh, but again, I but again, I I'm not under the illusion that I'm the only person that feels that way. At least, at least, I hope I'm not the only person that feels that way.
I can only hope that everybody is. We may not be content with where we are, but we would be content dragging everybody else down to where we are.
uh,
No,
man,
but
this.
her thoughts of the older brother, and you get these just a sense that, or if it just feels like his stuff that he narrates resonates, and I felt like that was something that, yeah, I guess I'd say going back to when we talked about the Inkle and how we talked a little bit about the main character in that book didn't really draw us in necessarily. Like the character himself, John DeFool, he didn't necessarily resonate with us because he was kind of a blank slate, as we
Yeah,
said. With us because he was kind of a blank slate, as we
yeah,
said. I felt like this story, totally different tone, totally different type of comic, but in a lot of ways it was easier to read it. Like it was more compelling because of the character.
Yeah.
Easier to read it. Like it was more compelling because of the character.
Yeah.
The character, he's not necessarily, or maybe I'm not necessarily at the point where I am so attached to the character that I think of him as like a friend. Not necessarily, or maybe I'm not necessarily at the point where I am so attached to the character that I think of him as like a friend or something. You know how sometimes when you spend a lot of time with a character, it's almost like you know them so well that you know them like you know your friends. I think of him as like a friend or something. You know how sometimes when you spend a lot of time with a character, it's almost like you know them so well that you know them like you know your friends.
Mm.
And maybe I'm not at that point after reading volume 1, but it did make me think that if I were to immerse my it did make me think that if I were to immerse myself in this entire series and start reading like chunks and chunks of volumes, I could easily see myself growing attached to the
Yeah.
characters.
Yeah.
There's something human and relatable about them, and even their point of view resonates because just I don't know, disappointment or
Yeah.
feeling like a little failure or something. I'm
Yeah.
not the Jedi I should be. I want more, but I know
Yeah.
I shouldn't.
Yeah, and I just want to add, like, so when, just for context for the listeners, like, yeah,
He's not
he's
just
not,
a guy that works on cars. He designs cars for a major manufacturer, so he's got
exact,
like a good career.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So right at the beginning, it's not like he's a loser or anything like that. He's up looking for work, and he's shut out of uh all the other companies in a similar field because
Industry.
in the industry because the company that he works for has essentially put him on a blacklist, letting
It's
other
like
company knows.
you don't want to hire this guy. He's gonna headbutt you.
Yeah, he ends up being like I think he's like a janitor or something.
Uh, I thought he was flipping burgers,
Oh, maybe he was flipping burgers. He had like some sort of low level like
like a menial task.
yeah, exactly, just to
Or
make
he
ends
was like
meet.
he might have been like a parking lot attendant or something.
Yeah, like I don't remember exactly what he did. I just remember that it wasn't the most like notable job, you know?
It's the kind of thing where you go from designing cars to watching other people.
Like notable job, you know?
It's the kind of thing where you go from designing cars to watching other people uh, drive the cars you designed and then yell at you for telling them that they have to pay a parking fee or something. Watching other people uh, drive the cars you designed and then yell at you for telling them that they have to pay a parking fee or something.
Yeah,
It's
exactly,
like
exactly.
there's just this sense
It's
of
a fall from grace.
irony to it. Yeah, it's a fall
Yeah.
from grace or something.
Yeah,
It's
exactly,
like
exactly.
there's just this sense
It's
of
a fall from grace.
irony to it. Yeah, it's a fall
Yeah,
from grace.
for sure. And so, once he's at that point and again, like you have to remember that headspace for him to again, like you have to remember that headspace for him to apply to be an astronaut and to be in his brother's shadow. Like there's even this one moment where he has to move back home after he gets fired and he goes to live with his parents and you could tell his parents are disappointed because and you could tell his parents are disappointed because he's eating dinner with his parents and they like give him they're giving out desserts and it's these strawberries in a cup and the mom and dad both get 5 strawberries and he only gets 3 and you can tell that it's like
That their
yeah,
son could be doing better. They're
exactly,
disappointed.
Yeah, they don't want to give him. They could have both easily given him one of their strawberries as a sign of love, but it's it's a pretty like hurtful. I mean, like it's played.
Obviously still care for him and
Yeah,
about him, but it is just kind of their way of letting him know that he's got to do something,
yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
And it
yeah.
makes sense. Like there's just those little details in their relationships make this times we see the flashbacks early on in the book when from when they were kids.
Hmm.
There is a sense of just brotherhood between them. I mean it's obviously in the title, but you do get a chance to see what that brotherhood means to both of them. See what that brotherhood means to both of them,
Hmm.
and the fact that both of them remember that moment with a lot of clarity.
Yeah,
Even they even went so far as to, I guess, when they were kids, they had this habit where they would bring a tape recorder around and record a lot of their where they would bring a tape recorder around and record a lot of their conversations as they would go on these adventures together. And that's kind of like how this whole thing kicks off is that Muta tells his brother what happened, and his brother tells him to listen to the tape from blah blah blah. Tells him to listen to the tape from blah 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 day
yeah,
when we were out in the field and saw that UFO, and he listens to it and he hears his his own voice saying, we or he hears both of their voices saying that they made a promise to or he hears both of their voices saying that they made a promise to both go into space one day, and that's
yeah,
that's pretty much what fuels him or motivates him to take on this endeavor.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I thought it was kind of interesting how there was so much significance placed. Thought it was kind of interesting how there was so much significance placed on those flashbacks.
Mm,
Like there's a lot of scenes in the beginning of the book that are references or allusions to a lot of real world events because they were both born in the 90s and Agony of Doha, which was like a pretty big event in Japan when the national soccer team failed to qualify for the World Cup, and it was
yeah,
like always like a pretty big thing uh, in their sports culture. And then there's like other events that I in the World Cup when like I still remember watching that myself. So to see it in this comic, it kind of made me smirk because that was history that I personally remember watching on TV, and that's exactly what Muta does to his boss.
yeah, yeah. Note what their what their timeline was relative to actual history.
Yeah,
You know, I thought that was a pretty good touch as well. Yeah. Did you? I thought that was a pretty good touch as well. Yeah. Did you? What? How would you like characterize this comic exactly, Drew? Like, if you were to try to describe it to our, did you? What? How would you like characterize this comic exactly, Drew? Like, if you were to try to describe it to our listeners, what genre do you think you would put this under?
man, that's tough. It feels
What genre do you think you would put this under?
man that's tough. It feels like it could be a variety of genres. Like it doesn't really feel like it hews to a, a specific single type of genre
Mm,
because knee jerk reaction would probably be to say it's science fiction.
right,
And
right.
I guess that's probably accurate since it does take place in the future,
Yeah,
especially when you take into consideration what year it was originally created. You know, it it was made after it was actually created. So there is definitely some sense of speculation in terms of how Koyama must have envisioned the future. So from that sense, I think we could say it's science fiction, but so far that's too advanced beyond what we have today in terms of technology or even the setting or anything like that. Like there isn't like if you didn't tell me that this was taking place in 2025, even though the comic was made in 2008. Like if I just read that with that in present day, like I wouldn't
Yeah,
know
yeah,
any difference.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting to me. Like, I don't want to read this first volume and, based on what I've read, presume that I feel like this being such a long-lasting series, there's definitely a lot of different directions that it could take. So it's very grounded in reality
Hmm.
currently, right? Like the sci-fi science fiction elements of it are pretty limited.
Yeah,
Like I would say that the only science fiction aspect limited.
yeah,
Like I would say that the only science fiction aspect of it is just the space travel aspect, right? But even that isn't it's
it's
not
not
the
too far from what
emphasis.
we have in reality right
Exactly.
now.
Exactly. Like
What we have in reality right
exactly.
now.
Exactly. Like uh what's his name? Koyama doesn't take the opportunity of the manga to uh like he doesn't take the opportunity to write a manga that's just this opportunity to write a manga that's just this fantastic flight of fancy where he talks about all this pseudoscience uh for where the pseudoscience is a focal point of the manga itself.
Hmm.
So a focal point of the manga itself.
Hmm.
So as of right now, it's a very like human and emotionally based story. But
Yeah.
that being said, I won't rule out in that being said, I won't rule out in future mangas in future volumes the possibility that he's gonna inject more of that stuff and really take the story to some far off places at some point. Continue to be about these two brothers and
Hmm.
their relationship as they as the older brother uh, tries to become an astronaut. But I also won't discount the possibility that they could go to,
Gonna be before we get a resolution to Muta's training. Like, is he? I assume he's going to successfully become an astronaut.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it's possible that he could end up failing, and the story could go in that direction. I really
yeah,
don't know because I had tests,
yeah.
and so eventually overcoming all the hardships and the
Yeah.
challenges, and
It feels
he'll
like
become an astronaut, and
yeah,
then we'll see what happens when he becomes an astronaut and move forward from there.
yeah. Like it feels like the trajectory of the story is ultimately going to be that astronaut training. He's gonna come up with a couple of challenges here and there, which he'll ultimately overcome before ultimately becoming an astronaut that gets to go to space.
Hmm.
But then again, I won't, like I said, I won't discount gonna happen where it becomes a completely far out story that still has elements of the familial relationship between these two brothers, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I
Like
guess in a. Oh no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no. Well, I was going to say like the thing that I find interesting about this manga is there are a lot of mangas that are still fictional but very grounded in reality. Uh like there's mangas about um for example, there's mangas about that are still fictional but very grounded in reality. uh like there's mangas about um for example, there's mangas about making ramen, or there's
Mm-hmm.
mangas about working in a factory. There's mangas about um for example, there's mangas about making ramen, or there's
Mm-hmm.
mangas about working in a factory. There's mangas about working in an office. There's really a whole bunch of these genres of manga that exist where about working in an office. There's really a whole bunch of these genres of manga that exist where um it's where they take something mundane and inject drama and character into it. And this almost feels like it could be one of drama and character into it. And this almost feels like it could be one of those, except for the fact that it's based in the future, right? So if they
Yeah.
had just done a story that took place in modern day that was what about a manga that was about what it takes to be an astronaut, this could have very easily a manga that was about what it takes to be an astronaut. This could have very easily been that, you know?
Yeah. And I guess when you put it that way, if we go back to trying to pigeonhole it in a genre, I guess we could even say that this is kind of like a slice of life. Except it feels weird to call something that's, you know, uh, 8,000 pages and counting slice of life, because that's one fat slice.
Yeah. It's
But
life. It's
life. But the fact that it is about emotions and the emotional reactions that the characters go through while undergoing or participating in a certain task or just being in a certain circumstance in life, that's what makes it kind of feel like a slice of life story, because
yeah.
or the action's not about fighting anybody, it's not about trying to beat up bad guys or anything like that.
Yeah.
The
They're
enemy
not fighting
here is,
Thanos.
yeah, they're not fighting Thanos. The enemy here is an enemy that Muta can punch in the face, insecurities and his self doubts and his just the things that he faced in life that brought him to this point.
Yeah.
Same as anybody, it's like we all have those same
Yeah.
kind of enemies, self doubt and just feeling uh inadequate.
One of the writing uh devices that exists is the idea that every story is based on five core conflicts, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, where the five conflicts are man versus nature, man versus God, and then man versus self, right?
Hmm.
And again, like in this scenario, in this so the idea is that out of all stories, those five forms of conflict, those five forms of conflict usually tend to be the foundation of any story, right? And
Right.
in this particular case, it's like you said, it's not like he's facing off against it's not like he's facing off against something that he can punch or beat. What he's dealing with, what he's what his primary conflict is with his own insecurities and his own self, you know?
Hmm. Hmm.
And it feels like it's going to be a story that follows that journey to overcome uh himself, combined with the journey to overcome uh the obstacles that are in his way to becoming an astronaut, right? It's a
Yeah.
combination.
When you put it that way, it does make the theme of the book stand out. Just the theme, or makes one of the specific themes of the book stand out. And the theme that I'm thinking of is just that idea of reaching for the stars, because
Mm.
like in a sense they're very reaching for the stars
Yeah.
when they're astronauts. You know,
That's his
they actually,
potential.
yeah, they actually want to go into space, but there's also that uh, figurative sense of just reaching for a goal. You know, just trying to attain something that go into space, but there's also that uh, figurative sense of just reaching for a goal. You know, just trying to attain something that is out of reach, something that you can see. And Muta's goal is to be an astronaut, of just reaching for a goal. You know, just trying to attain something that is out of reach, something that you can see. And Muta's goal is to be an astronaut so that his brother can look up to him again. You know, he wants to feel that him again. You know, he wants to feel that that's what he's reaching for. So it's it's cool to me that the creator of the manga came up with a way to really bring an image to that internal struggles where the character is striving for something that is just out of reach in an emotional way, but also in a very physical way too.
Mm.
Like
Mm.
that's some clever.
So do you think this is something that you're gonna continue to read beyond this first volume, Drew?
Yeah, man. I think this is something I would absolutely continue reading. The only question is the amount of time that it would take to read all of what I have, because
Yeah.
I got this bundle digitally, and it's like the first I think I have the first 30 or maybe even 34 volumes of it.
Mm. That's
So
pretty good, man.
that's a lot, and
Mm. That's
so
pretty good, man.
that's a lot, and it's not even all of it.
Yeah.
So that's pretty daunting,
Yeah.
but you know, logically speaking, I could easily read one volume a week or something like that until
Yeah.
I get to the end. So it wouldn't really be a Herculean task.
Yeah.
It would just be a task. And I will say that I'm more motivated to dive into volume two of this than I am to dive into volume two of the Inkle after we read it last week.
Yeah.
These long form,
Yeah.
serialized, character driven stories.
Yeah. I was gonna mention just for those of you who are listening, who are listeners who are curious about this manga, but just to clarify, it's not a very you know.
Hmm.
So it was certainly something where if I had really committed myself, I could have probably read it all in one sitting. But
Hmm.
uh, but wanting to digest what I read and in parts, with breaks in between. But
Hmm.
even so, it's not like I read it and I felt like it was just junk food for the brain or anything. It was interesting to me, and I probably share the same sentiment as you in that um I really read the Inkal at the moment, the volume two of the Inkal, but
Hmm.
with this, there is something in the back of my mind that is curious
I
about
really want to know
what.
what happens next.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious
Simple as
about
that.
what the rest of his journey is. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think of the art?
If I had to be perfectly honest, it was serviceable. It was fine. Like I didn't think it was. It felt like it was pretty much in line with other manga art that I had seen.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
so it wasn't anything that necessarily jumped out at me, especially relative to other manga.
Hmm. So
But
you think it was kind of plain?
yeah, I do. And I would even say Yeah, I do. And I would even say that there were certain points where some of the figures, like, again, considering that this is a science fiction comic, it wasn't anything where a lot of, at least in this first volume, at least in this first volume, a lot of energy or a lot of focus was placed on design or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. So it's not like I saw a lot of science fiction design work, space stations or space focus was placed on design or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. So it's not like I saw a lot of science fiction design work, space stations or space rocket ships or whatever or technology.
Mm-hmm.
It was really grounded in just the people. Um, and there were fiction design work, space stations or space rocket ships or whatever or technology.
Mm-hmm.
It was really grounded in just the people. Um, and there were occasions where I would even go as far as to say that some of the people didn't necessarily look as good as to say that some of the people didn't necessarily look as good as I wanted them to be to look.
You mean you
But
wanted them to be more attractive, or you think that they were just drawn funny?
they were drawn funny and they probably could have looked better compared to some other mangas that I've read.
That way about?
I'm thinking there were occasions where the older brother, where the way that they drew him was, I think he looked oddly lanky, you know?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, I think relative to other manga, it's certainly still in line with other manga that I've seen, but it didn't it didn't go above and beyond or really wow me in any way as of yet, but I enjoyed the story enough where the art didn't, you know,
Didn't
uh,
detract.
yeah, it didn't detract exactly. And I would even say that on its own the art was fine, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Its own the art was fine, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the art? Do you have any favorable or unfavorable thoughts?
I think I'm more on the favorable side.
Uh,
I've read a ton of manga, and while I will say that Koyama's art here doesn't blow me away or really impress me, I do think that the strength of his artwork is the clarity and how easy it is to follow the story.
mm,
Even though there are some scenes where facial expressions
mhm.
and the body language is on point, that's something that is always important to me. I think that the way he draws the faces, it just works, man. Like they're not necessarily the most realistic people. He's just drawing a natural style, and there might be some points where the characters or the figures kind of look strange. Like I'm thinking of this one scene when near the end of the book when Muta flies to Houston to meet his brother, and he's meeting his brother, and this little a dog walks up to
Yeah.
him, and then he starts walking away, and the dog is following him, and then he starts running. And there's this panel where he starts running, and the way that Koyama draws his body as he's running, it just looks kind of not how a person who's really running would look.
Mm,
So maybe, yeah, I guess you could say the art's not like it's not flawless or anything, but
yeah.
for the most part, it gets the job done. You know, like
Yeah.
I give him credit for how clear everything is, and things can be so busy. Like some of the panels have so much stuff in them that it gets a little bit confusing at times, or other manga where there's a lot of action and fight scenes and stuff. Even though like individually the drawings look really good, but from a storytelling good, but from a storytelling perspective, it makes you step back and have to pause to try and examine what you're looking at and how things flow from one panel to another. And anytime you do that, it just kind of slows down the reading experience and possibly even takes you out of the comic, you know?
Yeah.
Possibly even takes you out of the comic, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you, man.
Yeah, so I like how his art doesn't do that. It doesn't ever take you out of the comic. It just keeps things flowing in an easy way.
Yeah.
And that's why that's one thing that helped an easy way.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that helped it be a really breezy kind of read. There isn't a whole lot of text, so it's not very dense in terms of the amount of words per page. But in terms of the amount of panels per page, it's not too heavy there either, like a lot of manga. Panels per page, it's not too heavy there either, like a lot of manga.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to me that we could also say that this is a pretty good example of decompressed storytelling because it's like 200 something pages and it doesn't really because it's like 200 something pages and it doesn't really feel like we've gone too far, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Like the page count in and of itself feels like a lot, but in terms of the story that we do get, it's we're not inundated with information, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like the text is dense. It doesn't even feel like a lot is going on. You're really immersed in the the moments that you do get out of this comic. The the moments that you do get out of this comic, you
Yeah.
know? So the
Yeah.
experience of him going to school or him looking at a display astronaut and wanting to envision himself going to space. It's those little details, wanting to envision himself going to space. It's those little details that captivate you while you're reading this.
Totally, man. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was a great read, man.
Yeah.
Gotta read volume 2.
Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with the choice. I will say that after reading it, I'm more interested in reading the rest of it. In addition to that, I'd even say that I'm interested in checking out the anime at some point.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, actually I after I finished reading volume 1, I went on YouTube and just looked up the trailer for the anime just to some of the scenes in the trailer look pretty much straight out of the first couple chapters of volume 1.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask this. The so I haven't seen the trailer, but would you
Mhm.
say that the what you saw of the trailer, does it establish any kind of a tone? Like, does it try to be serious? Like, what would you say you got from that trailer in terms of the tone of the story they wanted to tell?
So the trailer was only like probably 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, but I would say it had the same tone as the manga. So it's not overboard on the comedy. It's not overboard. It's really just a few scenes of them as kids, seeing the UFO or whatever it was, and then making the promise. And then from there you see scenes of Muta kind of going about uh, the journey in Volume One, where you see little scenes of him like getting fired from his job after he doing those menial tasks and then enrolling in the program or whatever you call it. I don't even know what they call it in the story. I can't remember if it's a program or just a series of tests or something, but you see him doing all that stuff.
Mm,
Red.
okay. I mean, I asked because I'm curious, because I think the thing about mangas that are turned into animes, sometimes like how I read a manga and like how I imagine necessarily be what they intend, and when I see it in an anime where they can apply, music and
Mm-hmm.
pacing to it as they see fit. It's interesting to see if it's different
Yeah, anytime something gets adapted into a different medium, there's certainly going to be some slight differences.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, from just that short trailer, it's hard for me to detect what those differences might be.
Mm.
Actually, one thing you just made me realize, or remember to mention was in terms of going back to the art and the designs. I was gonna say for a pair of brothers, Muta and Hibito don't really look very similar.
Yeah, they're pretty. Yeah, they're pretty. They're pretty different from each other. Like, uh, what is his name? Hibito.
Yeah, he
He's
has
the young.
blonde hair.
Yeah, he's got this bleach blonde hair, which this bleach blonde hair, which one presuming that they're Japanese, it's a safe bet that he dyes his hair. So that's probably not a genetic thing, but uh, the other brother Muta, he's got from the sound like coarse and tangled hair. And he looks just
Hmm.
kind of messy, whereas Hibito seems like he's a lot cooler.
He looks like a pretty boy.
Yeah, he's a pretty boy. He's definitely on the cooler side. So he kind of
He had the
okay. Then I have no real explanation for that.
what you don't think parents would let their kids bleach their hair blonde?
Oh, well, that's probably the case, but I guess he's stuck with that look.
Yeah. Or it could just be one of those things in comics where
Yeah,
or in manga where they like draw in Japanese people to look they don't really draw them to look like Japanese people, you know?
yeah,
Kind of like in
like
Sailor Moon or something where all the girls have different colored hair.
yeah,
Where they like draw in Japanese people to look they don't really draw them to look like Japanese people, you know?
yeah,
Kind of like in
like
Sailor Moon or something where all the girls have different colored hair.
yeah, exactly. There's no actual girl out there with naturally green hair, as far as I can tell.
Sailor Moon or something where all the girls have different colored hair.
Yeah, exactly. There's no actual girl out there with naturally green hair, as far as I can tell. Uh,
So, Albert, having read Volume 1 of Space Brothers, would you have any recommendations for anything kind of similar or comparable that you might think other people who enjoyed Space Brothers would want to check out?
um, so the first thing that came to mind, oddly enough, I would say it's almost diametrically the opposite of what Space Brothers is,
Ooh,
but I think it's still similar enough, which is Two Brothers by Far.
one.
This is a comic that's about these two brothers that grow up in this village together, and their lives just go in different directions. But I forget. I want to say that they're twins. Yeah, they're twins. And the thing about them is they're twins. And the thing about them is through their experiences, they end up despising each other and and it's just a story about how in spite of the fact that they are twins and that they are brothers, of the fact that they are twins and that they are brothers, uh it's like that line in Shakespeare, about how like your worst love from your worst hate.
Mm-hmm.
Um yeah, but it's the opposite. It's almost this idea that they're brothers and because they're supposed to love each other, that they could not. It's because of those things that they're almost destined to hate each other more. You know?
Nice, nice. Hate brothers.
Yeah, like I think there are a lot of stories idolize it or like paint a pretty picture about family, and I think that's good too, but this was something that goes in the opposite direction, and it's not something that you see very often, or that, at least as far as I can tell, where
Mm-hmm.
uh people, but it's that closeness that just makes them hate each other and despise each other even more than normal
Yeah.
people would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That,
Have
that's
you
a
ever have you ever
that's a
read it?
fascinating concept. I read it a long time ago, borrowed from the library, so it's
Yeah.
not super clear to me on all the details. But give it, I should borrow it sometime.
I never got a copy of it. I remember the Green Apple was selling. They had a stack of these on their remaindered books, and I always intended to go back and buy it, but it sold out before I ever got a copy,
You
which I
snoozed and you
regret now.
losed.
Yeah, yeah. So let that be a lesson to all of you. If you see on it, otherwise you'll miss out.
Yeah, and you'll end up like our romantic love lives. We're constantly missing out. We snoozed and we losed. We snossed and we lost
Why am I laughing?
because the only.
Uh, what about you? What about you, Drew? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, get a better paying job. That's
Well,
my
that ends
advice.
our episode. That's our episode.
Bleach your hair blonde so you'll be more attractive to women. That's my recommendation. Then maybe you won't end up like us. No, in terms of comics, I'd recommend us. No, in terms of comics, I'd recommend the first thing that came to my mind was Planetes, and this was my recommendation last summer when we did our episode with Shanus and Zach about our science fiction recommendation. First thing that came to my mind was Planetes, and this was my recommendation last summer when we did our episode with Shanus and Zach about our science fiction recommendations. So I won't go too deep into it again, but Planetes by Makoto episode with Shanus and Zach about our science fiction recommendations. So I won't go too deep into it again, but Planetes by Makoto Yukimura was a two-volume manga, and you can get it. You can still get it. It's published by Dark Horse. It's a very realistic, hard science fiction uh, story that's also about people that love space. But in this story in Planetes, they already have a city on the moon, and they have from being in outer space. That's an ever-present theme that is common in Planetes as well as Space Brothers. And I think Planetes does a really great job with the science aspects of the story, but it also does an awesome just the human element and the emotional content as well as the philosophical content. Like it's something that is extremely satisfying on every single level, and the artwork in that is mind-blowingly good.
Yeah.
So I would definitely recommend Planetes if you're feeling a story. Definitely recommend Planetes if you're feeling a story about space travel that's realistic and isn't just about Star Wars kind of space battles and things like that. If you're looking for something more
Yeah.
grounded in reality, I would definitely recommend
Yeah.
Planetes.
Not space opera.
Reality, I would definitely recommend
Yeah.
Planetes.
Not space opera.
Yeah, it's not space opera. It's hard science fiction.
Yeah. It when you mentioned that, it made me think of another recommendation that I would probably put on the list. Uh You there?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, first of all, the first thing that I forgot to mention about Two Brothers is, so I mentioned it was by Fabio Moon and Gabriel Ba, and the thing about that is those two are actually brothers.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Those guys are brothers.
yeah, so like you know, uh, growing up as two brothers, working on that comic, there are things in there that come from a place of truth, is what I'm saying.
Wouldn't it be weird if they genuinely did hate each other, but they just
And
continued working with each other because that was the only way they could be successful? One of them was abusive towards the other brother, so
yeah,
that's
so
that's why.
yeah.
Yeah.
So one of them was justified in his hatred of the other one. Oh man. Rated The Wonder of Space Travel. It made me think of Orbiter by Warren Ellis, and
Oh yeah, it's a great
I,
one.
I forget who the artist was. Do you?
Colleen Doran, I believe.
Yeah, that's another comic that is about space travel and just uh like the brief description that I can give of it is it's another story that takes place in a not too distant future,
Yeah.
but essentially uh mankind has turned away from space travel. Just a missing shuttle comes returns to Earth, a shuttle that went into space, and
Mm-hmm.
it it seems like there's some definitely something different about this space shuttle upon its return, but as the story progresses and as the story progresses and as you learn more, it really is a celebration of exploration and optimism about space discovery,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's a good choice.
Yeah.
It it definitely yeah, that's a good choice.
Yeah.
It it definitely leans harder into the idea of science fiction than Space Brothers or Planetests,
Yeah.
but it thematically there's definitely this appreciation and almost erratically there's definitely this appreciation and almost a reverence for reaching for the stars.
Yeah. 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 Totally.
Yeah, I was also gonna say I just checked, and the artist is indeed Colleen Doran. For the stars.
Yeah. 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 Totally.
Yeah, I was also gonna say I just checked, and the artist is indeed Colleen Doran, the artist of
Oh,
Orbiter.
nice, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if anyone is interested in hearing us talk more about Planet, I just checked, and the artist is indeed Colleen Doran, the artist of
Oh,
Orbiter.
nice, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if anyone is interested in hearing us talk more about Planet Tests, you can check out episode 31. That's when we talked about it with Zach and Shanus.
Yeah.
With Zach and Shanus.
Yeah. It's fun to talk about these space stories. I mean, it's fun to talk about like space opera stories, but sometimes it's fun to just talk about these stories that are more based in
It's there's always something more or something compelling when you have the human element in there. I'm not saying that it's always absolutely necessary,
yeah.
but just from I think for most people are probably drawn to stories that are about people. You can you can tell an experimental story that is more about ideas or concepts or situations than it is about people, but
Well,
the
here's a
audience might be
question.
limited. Yeah.
So, your hypothesis is that most people are drawn to stories about people.
Hmm.
What would you say to people who are drawn to stories about Spawn?
Oh man. Well, I would tell those well, I would tell those people to develop better taste in comics.
Get your shoe out of your mouth.
Look, it's one thing to like Spawn just because it reminds you of your youth or because it's something you grew up with, and you have a sense of nostalgia looking at Spawn comics.
Yeah.
But if you genuinely think that Spawn is awesome and that the stories are, you know, full of depth and worth reading, I really don't get it.
I would want to see someone write that essay. I would want to see someone do a college thesis where they break
Yeah,
down Spawn. I'd be
yeah,
curious about that.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
if the reason why you like it is just because you think the art is cool and you just want to see Spawn beat people up, the reason,
Yeah. Yeah.
if that makes sense.
That's far more than I would say to them. I would
I want to
have
hear what you would say.
I would say learn to breathe with your mouth closed.
Look, we might be single men who can't find love, but at least we're not Spawn fans. We might be lonely for the rest of our lives, but at least Spawn won't be keeping us company.
Exactly. But I'll tell you what, if you guys have some insights into Spawn, I'm not against it. Go ahead and contact us on our social, and I'd be more than happy to hear what you have to say.
Yeah,
Let's
like
hear
if
it.
there's that you would highly recommend that you think would completely change our opinions on Spawn, let us know. Maybe we'll even read it and do an episode about it and just talk about what we learned.
Hit us up.
Yeah. Oh, before we head out, I did have one more serious recommendation
Sure, shoot.
for Space Stories, but it was gonna be this graphic novel from several years ago, or maybe I guess it was like over a decade ago, but the graphic novel Laika by Nick Abadzis. I
Oh,
think that's how you the graphic novel Laika by Nick Abadzis. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So this was a graphic novel published by actually I don't remember who the publisher was. I thought it was First Second, but I don't think it is First Second. It's a story. I thought it was First Second, but I don't think it is First Second. It's a story that's based on the dog Laika, who was that Russian dog.
The first dog in space.
First dog in space. Yeah. So it's based on a true story. I read it a long time ago. The dog Laika, who was that Russian dog.
The first dog in space.
First dog in space. Yeah. So it's based on a true story. I read it a long time ago, so all of the details aren't too super clear to me, but I will say that it was a true story. I read it a long time ago, so all of the details aren't too super clear to me, but I will say that it was pretty emotional kind of story, especially if you like dogs and you have if you like dogs and you have you just appreciate animals, and it's based on there's not really too many liberties taken in terms of just the fantastic. It's not fantastical or anything. It's more of a serious stuff.
Yeah.
I would recommend that. It's still a story about people trying to reach space and the sacrifices that they had to make in order to attain that dream. I will say that reading Space Brothers did make me want to reread because it's been so long since I've read it.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I might be confusing this with something else, but it wasn't a wordless comic, was it?
No, it's got a lot of words.
Okay. Yeah, I must have thought of something else. something else.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I mean, because it's based on a true story, I feel like there are at least a couple of stories based on that same dog that I can think of.
Oh, comics or just stories
Yeah,
in general?
comics. I forget. I remember reading
In general.
comics. I forget. I remember reading this one short story. I forget who it was, or it might have been an animation or something like that. But there were some people who. Okay, so not to spoil it to you for too many people, but that first dog that went into space didn't actually come back from what I remember. It was basically a one-way trip,
Mm,
and
yeah.
so I remember reading this like one comic, a short story where someone wanted to give that dog a happy ending. And that wrote the comic essentially told a story about how the dog crash landed on some other planet and, lived out the rest of its days in happiness.
I see.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'd have to look for it, but I don't remember what exactly that story was or who it was by, but I just thought it was a funny anecdote.
Cosmo, the space dog from Marvel Comics. He's that dog that has telepathic powers, and I think he was part of the Guardians of the Galaxy for a while.
Huh. I am not familiar with that dog.
Yeah, he's a dog that has kind of this astronaut looking. I think they put him in the background in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies.
Yeah. Wasn't he at the end with
The Collector, when everything got destroyed
Well, I was
in the
gonna say, wasn't
Collector's
he
lab.
with Howard the Duck?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
scene.
Yeah. Okay, I
Yeah,
remember that. Yeah.
because that he was the only I don't know, he was unique.
Yeah.
So he was that was supposed to be Cosmo the space dog.
That's pretty cute.
Yeah. All
Well,
right. Any final thoughts?
no, I enjoyed our pick, and I'm glad that we're to manga and comics. So for those of you who follow us on the podcast, please go and check out Space Brothers Beyond Volume 1.
Yeah. And if anyone out there is pretty far into Space Brothers and you've read a bunch of it, yeah, I'd be curious to hear what you think of the series and hearing what people like about it. What are the
Talk
things
with
that
us.
they appreciate? Yeah.
Yeah.
So next week, in our next episode, we'll continue our monthly reread through Invincible by Robert Kirkman and Ryan Ottley. So next episode, we're going to go through issues 36 to 47, or if you're reading it in trades, volumes 8 and 9. So yeah, stick with us, and we hope you enjoy it as well.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody, this is Between the Gutters, signing off.
Bye, guys.
Peace out.